Okay, we're going to move on to our consent agenda, and tonight we do have some unscheduled speakers who desire to speak on an agenda item under the personnel actions, and they will be coming before us this evening before we take a vote, since that it's an item to vote on. I will allow them to come at this time to address the board. It is Ms. Vicky Rodriguez and Mr. Brian Mose. And you can come in whatever order you please. We welcome you as you come up. You prepare to come up. And please give your name again when you get to the podium and your address, please. You have 3 minutes to make a presentation.
Thank you, members of the board. My name is Brian Mose. I'm an attorney. I practice in Orlando. My address is 231 East Colonial Drive, Orlando, Florida, 32801. I'm here to speak on behalf of Jeanne McGuire and the Florida Education Association. Before the board is a matter that has, from my understanding, been brought before the board back in June and has been the subject of much discussion among you and perhaps your individual staff members. The decision that you are about to make is going to affect the career of Ms. McGuire, who, by every account and measure of St. Lucie County Public Schools, is an exemplary teacher. I know that you're aware of her history. In 2012, she sustained a work-related injury. She treated. She returned to work. She continued an excellent career with St. Lucie County. In April of this year, through her worker compensation attorney, she provided a letter describing her physical limitations and restrictions. She made a request for accommodations of the school district. I understand from reviewing the school board meeting that Mrs. Rodriguez gave you a very good overlay and overview, I should say, of the current situation and working abilities of Mrs. McGuire. I'm not going to go into them because this is a matter of a public hearing. I do not care to make that a matter of public record, although I did communicate with each of the board members and the superintendent earlier today in a letter describing specifically the physical limitations that which she is afflicted with. Now, the reason I made special effort to come and speak today is because you are going to vote individually on a matter that is going to encroach upon the Americans with Disability Act. By your staff's correspondence that I've reviewed, you, the board, and staff regard Mrs. McGuire as being physically disabled within the meaning of the Americans with Disability Act. She is capable of performing her job as an educator, and she has done so since 2012. The law requires that before you terminate an employee, let me back up. I also understand that the single reason for the recommendation being brought forward today for termination is her disability. She is, according to staff, incapable of performing the functions, essential functions of an educator. In my letter, I advised of the requirements of the Americans with Disability Act. I've engaged in the process of interaction with the school board, which is required under the regulations that enforce the Americans with Disability Act. You are required to consult with staff before you make a decision to assess whether or not recommendations can be offered to Mrs. McGuire that would enable her to fulfill or continue her employment.
That's time.
Would you please wrap up, Mr. Moe? We'll give you an opportunity to wrap up right now.
As you consider this matter, I would simply request that you reflect on the communications that you've had with staff and ask yourself whether or not you've been fully advised on the merits of the case and the consequence of a termination given the protections of the Americans with Disability Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mose. Ms. Rodriguez, would you please come forward now?
Good evening. Vicki Rodriguez for the St. Lucie Classroom Teachers Association, and I want to speak on behalf of Jeanne McGuire. Jeanne is not here tonight. She has been through quite a bit on the agenda, off the agenda, not on the agenda, on the agenda. She's been in limbo for nearly 2 months as we were supposed to be making some effort to resolve this issue, which has not been resolved. I want to just make sure that you are aware that this issue is not about money. I don't know how else to impress upon you that it's not about money. Mrs. McGuire has been advised of all of the financial aspects of what retirement would mean, disability retirement, all of those things. She really wants to teach. Kindergarten teachers are like that, you know. They just love their kids and they want to be with them. So as you're making your decision, I know that part of what you need to consider is what's best for the district in the long run. And I want you to also consider what this would mean to your employees who are currently disabled, whether it's because of a workman's comp issue or because of some other injury or other physical or even mental ailment that they might have. What does it say to those employees about what you as a school board believe about what we are supposed to do to accommodate people? What does it say to parents of children with disabilities if you as a school board are not willing to make very simple accommodations for Ms. McGuire? You really do need to consider those things, because I need to tell you that everybody is watching. And I'm sorry that this decision got kicked down the road so that it comes in the hands of our new superintendent. But here we are. Nothing has changed. Mrs. McGuire still is capable of doing the job. We're still asking you to make accommodations for her that are very easy to make. Mr. Moe's letter does outline what some of those things are. We're asking you to consider them. They haven't been considered. So with that, I hope that as you're voting, you recognize that this is not just about Jeanne McGuire. It's about a lot more about what this district thinks and does for anyone with a disability, because that's really what this is about.
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. Board members, I will now call for a vote to move our consent agenda. We have the agenda before us, and I would entertain a motion at this time to accept the agenda as presented. So moved by Ms. Hensley. Was that Ms. Hensley? Mm-hmm. Second by Ms. Hawley. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion to move it forward is 5-0. Board members, do we have any conflicts that you need to declare on any of the items that will be coming before us this evening? Hearing none, Superintendent Jeanne, may we receive your recommendations?
Recommend approval of the consent agenda as submitted.
Board members, we have received the superintendent's recommendations. Are there any items you wish to comment on or discuss, and therefore pull out for separate vote? Okay, I am going to pull out item 8.01 under personnel termination actions of Jeanne McGuire. Superintendent, may we have your recommendations on the remaining items?
Recommend approval as submitted.
Okay, motion please.
So moved.
So moved by Mr. Ingersoll and second by Ms. Hensley. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, motion carries 5-0. Now we've pulled out the item 8.01 for discussion and for separate vote. And I pulled that item out because I want to just make sure I put my statement on record that I go with my previous convictions. I go with what I believe is the right thing to do in behalf of Mrs. McGuire. I see this woman as a highly qualified teacher, educator, and I don't see hardship to keep her for one more year here so that she can go and drop. And so I just want to open up discussion with our board members and see if we can come to an agreement before we take this vote, this particular vote? Anyone would like to respond? Okay, there's no response, so we're going to go right on with the separate. We're going to go right on with the separate vote. May I hear a motion for the item 8.01 under termination for Mrs. McGuire? It's 8.01. Motion on the floor, please.
Second.
Okay, Ms. Ms. Hensley moved, and Mr. Ingersoll seconded. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? I oppose. You oppose as well, Ms. Hilson? Anyone else? Everybody else is saying they approve? Okay, motion then carries 3-2.